psychology as an academic discipline is about 140 years old, and to define it, we would say very briefly, psychology is the study of the human mind and of behavior, and as an academic discipline, it covers many areas, very broad, and then subdivided into different elements. Now, it seeks to study it scientifically, and that's where, as an academic discipline, it broke away from philosophy, its kind of parent discipline, which had studied human minds, human behavior for, of course, centuries, millennia. Now, the different branches of psychology are so many, the main branches being, for example, clinical, occupational, educational, health, social psychology, sports psychology, and so on, and subdivisions of those. And there are different emphases within psychology, of course. There's the person, study of the person, study of processes of the mind, study of the biology, the biological aspects of brain and behavior, the statistical approach, and these are often, of course, combined in any study within the university. You get a little bit of each of them, but university departments often have their own particular emphasis. So you learn a lot about the human mind, human behavior, and it has discovered very useful findings over the last 140 years, and there are practical applications to that and some very positive applications. And yet, many people who study it, such as myself, and I began to study psychology a long time ago, it can often seem a bit disappointing because there's a bias towards the intellectual study and the need to keep it scientific, which means that many interesting areas don't get much attention. And we'll come to hypnotherapy in a minute in that regard. In the field of psychology, there are a few main theories which have determined the investigations that are taking place over the years into behavior, and those tend to be like the lens under which things are studied, and that would account for how psychology has studied hypnosis as well. They tend to try and fit it into one or two or three of the main paradigms. Now, we have the earliest stages of psychology, when it became split off from philosophy, was to make it scientific, and that covered the study of the mind through introspection and trying to time it and make it scientific as best they could. And then there was a need to move away from that. For many people, that's too subjective, so they began to study behaviorism. In other words, forgetting about the mind, almost just simply thinking of stimulus and response and how to learn through conditioning. And that held sway for many years. And then there was moves against that because it was felt very restrictive, a very restrictive way to try and explain the complexities of human behavior. And so gradually cognitive approaches and so on developed. But hypnosis is very interesting in where it fits into all of this, because the study of the mind, particularly in the clinical aspects of mental well-being and helping people with clinical problems, the study of the mind through clinical psychology was heavily influenced by hypnosis. People like Freud, back in those days of mesmerism, which was before Freud, but it was still ongoing. There were plenty of mesmerists around the time of Freud still. Freud studied hypnosis. And out of that, he developed his theories of the unconscious, and the whole theory of psychoanalysis developed. And from then on, we have all the talk therapies. So it's coming really from the root of hypnosis. Now, people, of course, rejected Freudianism to one degree or another over time, although psychoanalysis is still around, but it is not the big force it has been in the past, not for the last 50 years or so. So people began to study how to change behavior, to improve people's clinical conditions of the mind through behaviorism, and that was felt to be very restricted. Then there's the humanistic and the cognitive approaches which have developed over time. So there's a lot of important information discovered about human behavior, how the mind works, through academic psychology. And so that intellectual bias and emphasis, of course, has kept subjects like hypnosis and various phenomena of the mind in the periphery of things, because it was felt it was just too weird, we can't study it, it's unscientific. And gradually that kind of prejudice is breaking down. That 300 years of indoctrination that the intellectual mind is the source of all power and understanding is giving way, finally, in very practical ways, to the study of what's called the subconscious. Now, hypnotherapy is the very deepest study of the mind, of all aspects of the mind, but particularly focusing into the deep subconscious layers of the mind, what we call the subconscious. And so we want to very directly connect with and use that power. It's not just talking about it, speculating about what's in the unconscious, as Freud talked about it. We are using that power for change, very directly, for transformation, which is why we call it transforming therapy, in the form of hypnotherapy, at least that I teach, and that other people who train with Gil Boyne have worked under that label of transforming therapy, for a very deep approach to the mind and how to help the mind to improve and change the mind. So we teach that all the power is within us. That is the power for change. We can connect with that power, and it's far, far greater than we might imagine. And that's something that mainstream psychology has struggled with. There's almost been a kind of a blanket of suppression about our own inner power in many ways, because on the one hand, we want to avoid the charlatans and the extreme claims of all kinds of people who are maybe misinformed about how the brain works. But on the other hand, there's been an emphasis on the social determinants of behavior with the neglect of individual power. And it's only through that individual power we get individual responsibility, which allows us to take control of our lives, true self-reliance, true self-empowerment. That means we can always go towards change. We can always go towards success. It doesn't mean we'll always achieve a specific outcome. There's no guarantees in life, but we are moving towards it. And as we can begin to really use hypnotherapy effectively, we can begin to harness those inner forces, those deeper aspects of our mind, and our achievements can be far greater sometimes than we might even have imagined. So expectations are important, but we need to keep our minds on a learning curve as human beings begin to understand and discover the power of the mind. In my work, in working within surgery and medical applications, we've seen sometimes absolutely amazing transformations occur. I've got well known over the years for working with pain management, within surgery and for chronic pain, but that's only one area of mind-body interactions. So the mind can affect the body far greater than we think, and the mind can affect the mind. We're no longer going to be the slaves of our subconscious programming, of what other people put into our minds. We can truly mark our own scorecards in life and begin to release that power. That, of course, requires a real approach to hypnotherapy. When I say real, I mean that we're not simply just playing around with a few affirmations, a few suggestions, and a little bit of relaxation. Even though that may be quite nice for the mind and body, it does not really represent the true power of hypnotherapy, which deals with all of the deepest aspects of psychology, drawing on academic psychology, drawing on all the talk therapies and what those discoveries have uncovered about the mind, drawing on psychiatry, drawing on medicine, drawing on philosophy. Hypnotherapy has ancient roots going back into classical antiquity, and we're in a long, long tradition of understanding the mind and its power. And I hope you learn more about this, that you really can connect with yourself, who you really are, your real power, and begin to use that to transform your life and connect out into life for a much greater life, and no longer be a slave of the environment, the social environment, or a slave of our past. So thank you very much for listening and watching. That's just a very quick looking at how hypnosis, hypnotherapy and psychology overlap and also have very different emphases in certain respects. Thank you very much.